I had a patient last month, very old, clearly within days of death. His good days were spent being very sharp and very funny, and over time, we'd had some very pleasant, casual conversations. He reminded me of my own grandfather, the set of his humor, the way he truly listened to what you said, a generally decent man who had lived a good, full life and was making peace with letting it go. On an afternoon I was visiting, he asked me to sit down. He said that he had something to tell me before he died, that he'd been thinking about it for a long time, and that I was who he wanted to tell. I sat down and assumed that this was going to be something about his family, a deep regret, or some festering anger that he wanted to resolve. These kinds of things usually come up at the end of life. He told me that as a young man, in his early 20s, he'd been a bootlegger. This was, obviously, decades ago. He told the story without any judgment or sentimentalization, just the plain facts of a dangerous business in dangerous times, driven by good money and youthful invincibility. He got pulled over one night by a police officer on a country road. The officer ordered him to open the back of his truck. My patient said he knew instantly, with every fiber of his being, that if he did that, his whole life would unravel instantly. He said what he did next happened in under 2 seconds, and that those 2 seconds had occurred to him at least once every single day since. He pretended to reach for the padlock. Instead, he pulled out a pistol he carried and shot the officer dead. My patient added that the man didn't suffer, that at least that much was guaranteed, as the only kindness he could perceive in the entire situation. He got away from the scene of the crime, managed to hide the body and bury it somewhere that he never specified to me, and put as much distance as possible between himself and his deed. And then he went on with his life. He married and had children. He built a life that was largely, from all outward appearances, a normal and honorable one. He said he'd never told a soul for 50 years. Not his priest, not his lawyer, not a friend, not a family member, not his wife, not even in the intimacy of their marriage for decades. That enormous secret had just been there. When he finished telling me, he looked at me and said that I was the first person he had ever confessed this to, and he just felt it needed to be out. He slumped back into his pillow, looking as if he'd set down a weight that had been crushing him forever. I don't even remember what I said back. It must have been something trite, something I had been conditioned to say as a nurse. Because, in truth, at that moment, my mind had totally gone somewhere else. I was numb, functioning entirely on autopilot. He died 4 days later, and ever since I've been haunted by that police officer. Somewhere out there, in the archives of the state where that incident took place, is surely a case file. A decades-old, cold case. Unsolved murder of a state trooper, perpetrator unknown. And I am the only person in the world who knows who did it. And I don't even know which state. Because, in my shock, I forgot to ask. I have no earthly idea what I was supposed to do with it. I've run through the options over and over. He's dead. If I reported what little I know to law enforcement, which wouldn't give them much at all beyond a deathbed confession to a nurse, the only result would be a further desecration of the lives of his grieving family. But that officer, I think about him. I think about whether he had kids. I wonder if his family spent decades not knowing what happened. I still have no answers, and I don't think I ever will. I have been an emergency medicine physician for 18 years, and there is a version of immunity that develops over time in this work. Not a perfect immunity, not a total one, but a working resilience that lets you process difficult things without being destabilized by them. Because being destabilized in an emergency room is not a luxury you can afford. You see things that would stop most people cold, and you keep moving because the next patient needs you to keep moving. This is the one that got through that. A man came into the ER alone on an unremarkable midweek afternoon. He had no obvious physical complaint. He told triage that he had been having strange thoughts and that he wanted someone to tell him whether he was thinking right. That is not an unusual presentation. People come in with anxiety presentations, with the beginning stages of a mental health crisis, with concerns about their cognition. He was calm and cooperative, and I sat down with him. I asked him to describe the strange thoughts. He said he wanted to be straightforward, and I told him that was exactly what I needed him to be. He told me that he had been killing animals for a number of years, dogs and cats primarily, occasionally other animals he encountered. He described this with a calm and considered quality that I want to characterize accurately because I think accuracy matters here. He was not proud of it in any way I could detect. He was not confessing it with distress either. He was describing it the way a person describes a long-standing private habit that they have not previously shared with anyone, with a kind of careful neutrality, like he was trying to give me accurate information and stay out of the way of his own description. He estimated approximately 75 dogs and at least as many cats over the course of several years. He told me that he always felt a significant and specific sense of release immediately after, which he described with no apparent awareness of how clinical his language was, as similar in quality to physical intimacy. He said he had kept careful mental records of the locations where he had disposed of the remains, and that he had returned to several of those locations over time out of what he described as a genuine scientific curiosity about the process of decomposition. He found himself interested in the outcomes in a way he did not know how to otherwise explain. I recognized what I was looking at, and I made a decision in about 2 seconds to keep my face and voice completely neutral, because I needed him to keep talking, and any shift in my register might close him down. I asked him a few clarifying questions that gave me time to think, and then I asked him, as evenly as I have ever asked anything, whether he had ever thought about hurting a person. He said no. The word came immediately and without hesitation, and for a fraction of a second I thought we were somewhere manageable. And then he paused. It was a short pause, but it was meaningful in the way that short pauses sometimes are. And then he said he had been thinking about it quite a lot lately. He said there was no specific person. It was more the concept of it, the abstract idea of it. And when he tried to describe how that idea made him feel, he used the word excited. And he used it in a plain and honest way, without dramatizing it, which somehow made it worse. I excused myself and called psychiatry. The consulting psychiatrist interviewed him for nearly 2 hours. She was thorough and professional, and when she came out of the room, she confirmed to me that he presented as a sociopath, that his history of escalating harm to animals, in conjunction with his stated interest in applying that harm to people, represented a recognizable and genuinely dangerous behavioral trajectory. However, because he was not making a specific and immediate threat to an identified person, he did not legally meet the criteria for an involuntary psychiatric hold. He was discharged with a strong recommendation for outpatient follow-up. He stopped at the doorway on his way out and shook my hand. He thanked me for the conversation and said he had genuinely enjoyed talking with me and that he wished it could happen more often. He held eye contact for a moment that went on just a beat longer than comfortable, then turned and walked out. I stood at the nurse's station and watched him walk down the corridor and through the exit and out of sight. Then I called the outpatient psychiatric team and gave them everything I had, every detail, the full picture. I do not know whether he ever showed up for any follow-up appointment. I have never found out, and I am not sure I want to, because the answer in either direction leaves me somewhere I do not want to be. I still think about him regularly, not in a dramatic way, just in the way of a thing that got under the armor when you were not paying attention and stayed there. I think about the corner he turned at the end of the street. I've had people confess 40-year-long affairs to me. I've been told about children abandoned that have never been spoken of since. I've had people confess about cruelty that was never apologized for. As I've worked in end-of-life care for quite some time, one of the gifts that it can give, if you allow it, is a relationship with the sheer totality of what humans are, what they carry with them, and what they finally lay down at the end. You learn to hold these things and keep a straight face, mostly because dying people don't require our judgment, but partly because with years, you learn to feel some kinship, even for the oppressive weight of secrets carried 60 or 70 years without an outlet. I thought I had prepared for everything after having this work as my job for a while. He was an old man who was brought in by his family to live out his last few weeks. His family brought with him a wooden box, the contents of which they told us they had never seen. He was pleasant and undemanding the first few days, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary for an old, dying man who was making peace with the inevitable. Then, one afternoon, he asked to see me specifically, saying that he had something to put on tape that he needed a listener for before he died. He gave me his name that I cannot repeat here. He gave me his rank and his branch of service. And then he stated clearly that he had been a colonel in the SS in World War II. He then proceeded, in a voice and with the same rhythm that you might use to tell a biographer the story of your working life, that he was responsible in 1942 for ordering and executing the slaughter of over 4,000 Hungarian civilians, and that most of the victims were women and children. He meticulously laid out how the operations were planned and carried out, how the orders were given and executed, the scale, the precise methodology. He carefully explained how he'd avoided conviction by convincing authorities that the operations had technically been carried out under the command of the Hungarian army, and by emigrating, he had completely reinvented himself, altering the relevant facts of his history and identity enough to build a brand new life where he was previously a nobody. His family, he said, were completely ignorant of any of these details. I want to try and give an accurate portrayal of the tone in which he presented all of these facts, as I think this is crucial to what I am attempting to explain. There was nothing of the confessional in it. No anguish, no desperation, no outward shame, no plea for understanding or forgiveness. He wasn't getting something off of his chest. He was setting a record straight with the most concise and direct method possible. When I asked him why he was sharing all of this with me, he replied that it had happened and he wanted it noted, nothing else. He died 2 days later. His family expressed their appreciation to the staff, took his wooden box with them, and left. I stayed in the room alone for a long time after they had gone. I've sat at the bedsides of people who have committed terrible offenses, and while there's been grief and shame on their behalf, and frustration or anger on my part, there has always been some kind of human recognizable element coming off of them at the very least, some evidence of a conscience underneath it all. No matter how battered and perverted, people who have committed truly awful crimes always have a sort of texture to them. There is always a point where the weight of what they have done has etched its way onto their souls. He did not have that. He spoke of the slaughter of more than 4,000 people in the same cadence as if he were reciting his resume, with a discussion of logistics, scale, and outcome. Just information. In all of my years in end-of-life care, this was the first person whom I felt truly nothing staring back at me. Not cruelty, not callousness, not unacknowledged shame. Nothing. As though the particular piece of equipment, the one designed to assess one's impact on another human, had simply never been installed in this man's brain. I don't have a name for this. Even years later, I still don't. All I know is that it was the most horrifying thing that I have ever encountered in a room that was supposed to be dedicated to care, to peace, and to the closing of a life.